Good evening, and I'm calling at this time the regular meeting of the City of University Place Council for Tuesday, January the 16th, 2024 to order. And would the city clerk do the roll call, please?
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Boykin.
Here.
Councilmember Worthington.
Here.
Councilmember McCluskey.
I'm here.
Councilmember Fleming.
Here.
Councilmember Grassi.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Wood. Mayor Figueroa.
Present.
Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. If you can assist Councilmember Wood in getting his back on.
Yeah, you've got the
Oh,
control.
I have control. Everybody excuse me for a second if I can figure this.
You need to turn everybody off first.
Oh, really? Okay, well, she's doing that.
Screen being.
This one? Doing that, I'd like to go ahead and ask Councilmember Boykin to
My pleasure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic from which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, with that, I have a motion to approve the agenda.
Mayor, I'd like to move to approve the agenda for tonight.
Mayor Figueroa? I second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? None? Approved. Item number 5, presentation. Tonight we have online the State of Local Public Transportation in Pierce County by Pierce Transit. And we have Alexandra Mather, Government Relations Administrator, and Ryan Wheaton, Executive Director of Planning and Community Development online. So you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Good evening, Mayor Figueroa and Council. My name is Alexandra Mather. I'm the Government Relations Administrator at Pierce Transit, and I am joined today with my colleague Ryan Wheaton, who is the Chief of Planning, my apologies, at Pierce Transit. Next slide, please. So a little bit about who we are. We are your local Pierce County public transportation provider. There are roughly 37 other local transit agencies across the state, not to be confused with Sound Transit, which is the regional transit authority that serves Snohomish, King, and Pierce County. Many people believe that we are Sound Transit, and we just really want to remind folks that we are your local transit agency that moves the local folks in our local communities getting to the places that they need to connect with to enjoy a full and fruitful life. We are governed by a federated board made up of different representatives from the different cities included in our PTBA, which is a public transportation benefit area, and that is essentially our service area. And the PTBA was created under state law, and that is what we do. So next slide, please. By the numbers, we provide 4 services. I'm not sure what's going on with that slide right there, but our 4 core services are the 40-foot bus that you see around town, paratransit service, also known as shuttle. We also provide rideshare services, and rideshare is the post-COVID term for van pool. With rideshare definition, van pool used to be defined as 7 people in a vehicle or more, and the state has modernized those rules, and so now it is 3+. It's just a more nimble and personal tool for folks who need more flexibility in their commuting habits and objectives. And then we also have microtransit, which you can think of microtransit as a public Uber or Lyft, and we'll talk about that later in the presentation. Our PTBA is 292 square miles. We serve 13 cities and towns, 31 local bus routes. We have 877 employees, and we provide 5.5 million rides annually. Next slide, please. Public transportation benefit areas are funded through local sales tax. And we will talk about this later in this presentation as well, but PTBAs under state law have the authority to ask for up to 0.9% sales tax. And Pierce Transit has currently only received the authority from the voters for a 0.6% sales tax. And then we also like to educate folks on how our partnership with Sound Transit supports Pierce County, and we will talk about that on the next slide. So the Sound Transit partnership, as you may know, Sound Transit contracts their regional services with the local transit agencies in the counties that it serves. So when you're seeing those larger commute buses going up I-5, heading to the airport, connecting to sounder stations, those are all funded by Sound Transit, but operated by Pierce Transit employees. So that's millions of dollars that Sound Transit is investing in local transportation services and infrastructure in Pierce County annually. They also help us maintain the Tacoma Dome Station, which is the largest transit hub in the state of Washington. And then we also saw a $60 million investment from ST3 into Pierce Transit's enhanced bus route, which will serve pack out connecting from the Spanaway Walmart down to Tacoma Dome Station. Next slide, please. So our vision and priorities, we center safety in all that we do. We provide safe, equitable transportation services to those who need it most. And our goals are to find creative and innovative ways to recruit and retain a committed and diverse workforce. It is no surprise to anyone that operator shortage is a national emergency, I would say, that it is very hard to find operators across the country. And we see this in whether we're doing long distance trucking or public transit or deliveries of any kind. So, we look to be very creative and competitive in the market. Folks who come to become an operator at Pierce Transit, they receive a $5,000 hiring bonus, and also we train folks, we provide them the training for a CDL. So, it's a very lucrative job and it provides great benefits. And, that's one of our main focuses. We have historically been a very green agency. We were one of the first in the country back in the 80s to switch to compressed natural gas. And then in 2016, we received one of the first grants from the federal government to start electrification. So we have 9 electric buses, and we will continue on. Our goal is to be 100% carbon free or zero emission by 2042. Of course, that is all pending grants and outside investment. And then of course we want to deliver transit services that meet people where they are at, and that helps inform part of our runner program. And then, of course, we see ourselves as one of the cornerstones of a strong economic development plan, and so it is our goal to continue to be a strong community partner. Next slide, please. So we also prioritize equity in our service. So we leverage the county's equity index to help inform our planning decisions. And then we are constantly looking at the new technology and tools available to the transit industry to make it as, ADA accessible and compliant as possible. We recently implemented the Orca Lift fare program, which we were the last transit agency in the South Sound to do so, but our board finally adopted that, and so that's a low-income Orca fare, as well as we have the state-funded Youth Ride Free initiative, which is paid for through the Climate Commitment Act. And in last year alone, we saw over 700,000 youth take a ride on Pierce Transit free. Which those numbers are astounding, and it is just a real testament to the value that transit provides for our youth in access. And I like, as a parent, I like to think of what parents don't need to be driving to and from now because their kid can just get on the bus. But yeah, we are just, that's a remarkable number. We're really excited about it. And then we also have established a behavioral health response program from an early investment from the state last year. And what this is we are partnering a public safety officer with a behavioral health specialist. And we're also working with UW to help inform what this project or this program will look like. We're working with their School of Social Work. But essentially it's called the HART team, Hardship Assistance Response Team, and they will go and meet folks who are experiencing a behavioral health crisis on or around a transit facility so that we are able to provide them the care and attention that they actually need while relieving fire department, police officers, etc., so that they can go do the jobs that they are supposed to be doing, and we can continue to protect our system and get people the care they need in the quickest way possible. Next slide, please. In community partnerships, we have a community transportation advisory group. This is a group of volunteers throughout the community. They meet monthly, and they are truly the sounding board. Every policy or plan that the agency comes up with goes through CTAG and is vetted through their various experiences that they bring to the table, and then before it goes to the board. So the board relies heavily on them to ensure that our programs are meeting the goals and objectives of the board. And then we are currently working on a Joint Base Lewis-McChord interlocal agreement called an IGSA. It's an Intergovernmental Service Agreement, and what this is going to allow us to do, it's a mechanism within DoD, the Army in particular, and it allows them to provide funding for services that benefit JBLM and the community. So we have a runner system on JBLM right now, but it is not very robust, and we know that public transportation on base is one of the biggest challenges facing installations across the country. And so we're working with them on this IGSA that's going to allow us to expand transit via our runner program to provide. The details are not finalized, but we're aiming for we're aiming for 7 days a week, probably 7 a.m. to 12 p.m. or 12 a.m. And really, this is for servicemen members and their families before the families don't have access to transportation on the base. So this is for the spouses and the kids and the servicemen. So we're very excited about this. We are constantly, we work with our community colleges and are in constant conversation about apprenticeship opportunities. Our maintenance division is really focused on this area. And then because of our history with electrification, we're ahead of the curve. And so we like to offer our expertise to our fellow governments, local governments, to help them as they work on their zero emission transition goals. We always play a part partnering with emergency management, getting folks to the airport to deploy for natural disaster relief. For example, we drove the crew up to SeaTac, who went out to Maui for the wildfires. And then we have a Good to Give social corporate responsibility program where our employees come together and volunteer for various activities across the community, Northwest Furniture Bank, Emergency Food Network, et cetera, et cetera. So we're really proud to be contributing to the community in that way as well. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Ryan. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Some of the more important initiatives that we are working on now, one is something behind the scenes. We're in need of space, and we're reconfiguring what our base looks like, not just to provide better maintenance options for the vehicles that we have, but also some of the vehicles in the future. We expect that we will see more 60-foot buses in our region, both for sound transit routes that we operate and potentially for future high-capacity transit trips. There's also been some discussion of the double-tall buses at some point too. So we're looking at configurations to fit more vehicles and also be able to work on what we have. We have about 120 or so Pierce Transit buses, about the same number of Sound Transit Express buses that we operate. And then at any given time, we have a number of the roughly 250 or so van pool vehicles in our fleet that come in addition to the 100 shuttle vehicles or paratransit vehicles. We also our board just passed our bus system recovery plan. That's an exciting thing for us because we had a lot of changes in our region during COVID, and we went around to the community over the last 9 months and really dug into how we can better serve different areas of Pierce County, particularly looking at low-performing bus routes and eventually converting some of those over to microtransit, working on frequency and improving frequency where we feel like we can get some ridership gains and some improvements for those parts of the community. Last thing I'll mention here is our high-capacity transit work. We are implementing Stream, which we'll talk about in a second, but we're also looking toward the future, and we'll take a look at that on the next slide. Our high-capacity bus transit system that we've talked to you about in the past was Bus Rapid Transit, BRT. That project, unfortunately, got to a point where financially we could not sustain it, and we went to the board and had some pretty serious discussions toward the end of last year, and around the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, actually, our board decided to pause Bus Rapid Transit and then implement a different system. So we're actually launching an enhanced bus system that will still see many of the tenants that you would have found in BRT. On the next slide, we'll actually take a look at where that enhanced bus system is going to run. On the right side is actually south, and the left side is north. So this is going to be about 14.5 miles, stretching from our soon-to-open Spanaway Transit Center, which is south of the Spanaway Walmart, all the way through Midland and Parkland, down to Tacoma Dome Station, as Alex mentioned, the largest public transit hub in our region. And this is exciting for us because we're going to not just put a new route in service for the first time in a decade, but we're leaving Route 1 in place so it remains untouched, so that people that need to make those very frequent stops that we do along Pacific Avenue currently, they can continue to do that. But for other folks, they're going to see a stop about once every mile, and we're going to work on upgrades to this system. In March, when the launches, however, what people will see are typical buses working on a very more car competitive schedule to get from one end to the other. We're expecting a round trip for somebody from Spanaway to Tacoma Dome Station and back to save them about 22 minutes each day compared to what it would take currently if we could get to Tacoma Dome Station on the Route 1. Next slide. In the future, though, we want to expand enhanced bus and hopefully be able to upgrade to Bus Rapid Transit. You can see working left to right that we have some different corridors that we're considering for our next route. Of note for your city is that on this map, what is marked A, and that blue line on the far left, is our current Route 2, and that is one of the two finalists that we're looking at for consideration for what should be our next enhanced bus. This runs down Bridgeport, hangs right on 19th, and then goes to downtown Tacoma. And for us, this is a big deal because the hub that we have at Four Corners, the TCC Transit Center, is a big deal for us, not just for ridership, but also for community building. And we're doing some work both on this transit system, but also with the community as a whole and some projects that Alex has spearheaded in the area. Some of the things that people will see in these upgrades are improved safety amenities, both on the street and at the stations. We'll also get to provide some better transit signal priority for buses. We won't touch anything that goes on with emergency vehicles, but for our vehicles, it'll upgrade the TSP, the transit signal priority that we have in the region, and we're going to start that on Pacific Avenue in 2024. Next slide, please. Alex earlier mentioned our macro transit, our runner service. We started out actually working a project that was grant funded that we partnered with Lyft, and over the years we have worked pretty diligently to expand access to transit for people that don't live within walking distance of a bus route. So before you see a number of routes and service areas, service zones. University Place at one point was part of our trial, and in the future we may be back in that area with something like we have now with Runner. This is essentially a fleet of minivans that are operating on an app or a call-in option where people can do on-demand service within that zone to another area in that zone and hopefully connect with their closest transit center. So far, we have implemented these zones where we have no transit service, but we're excited that in November we actually launched a service in Puyallup, and we're looking at converting Route 425, which had pretty low ridership numbers, and actually moving people over to this on-demand system. In our first month of operation, our first full month, the Runner actually had as many rides in that month as the Route 425 had on average in 2023. So we're actually pretty excited moving forward that this is going to be a good option, not just to provide some flexibility, but also to provide better range and coverage throughout the system. In March, we plan to launch a few more. We're going to start a service in Gig Harbor that will connect people all the way from TCC Gig Harbor to the hospital. We're also going to replace a route up in northeast Tacoma, the 63, and then the Route 13 that runs along the water in downtown Tacoma. Next slide. Some of the other projects that are of note for University Place. First one is our bus shelter replacement. We are very aware of the condition with many of our bus stops, and those shelters not only need to be replaced, we need to figure out a way to prevent as much vandalism as we see in glass. So our new design, we're hoping, will actually provide some better coverage for us using a different type of shelter. We're going to get out and actually put about 45 or so of those in the upcoming year, and then hopefully we will get through and be able to utilize that moving forward for all of our shelters. We're also, I mentioned, looking at opening up a transit center. Spanaway Transit Center is going to open in hopefully the first quarter of this year. It will be our first transit center we have opened in nearly 20 years, and it's a big deal for us, not just because of the 20 park and ride stalls and the 2 routes that are going to be down there, but the second phase of this actually adds 200 more stalls and some increased ability for that vehicle to get out. And we're looking at some road construction that we're going to provide some better reliability for our vehicles. And then we also are continuing to look at ways to enhance the work that we've already done at Tacoma Dome Station. We have a very large presence down there. And moving forward, we want to make sure that when people think of public transit, when they think about getting around the community, that they often should think of Tacoma Dome Station first, because that is where you can catch nearly any type of transportation. Next slide. I want to end just by mentioning something that Alex touched on briefly. Pierce Transit operates about 85% of our local transit revenue comes from local sales tax. We currently tax at a 0.6% rate, and what you can see on the screen in front of you is just what some of our other similar sized agencies in the state collect. Community Transit in Snohomish County is at double our rate, 1.2. Spokane Transit's at 0.8. You can go to Olympia to see 1.2. Kitsap County collects 1.1. And you see these tax rates at different levels, but for an agency our size, we like to point out, especially to our partners at the 13 municipalities that we serve in Pierce County, that we come to work every day and we hope that the community feels like they're getting good value for the money that they put forward. And we also, as Alex mentioned, we want to highlight that we're a local service provider using primarily local funds, because outside of the 85%, the way that we're funded for local transit is simply through grants and our fare box, where people pay for their trips. With that, we will go to, I believe, the final slide. And just say thank you very much for having us in. I know that we don't get in often enough to speak with you, and we really appreciate the opportunity to come and share a little bit about the work we're doing at Pierce Transit.
Thank you, Mr. Wheaton and Ms. Mather, and do appreciate you giving us an update and a report on Pierce Transit. And moving on, Council, to item number 6, public comments. And for those online, please look at the screenshot. You'll have a public comment direction. And at this point, we're now... Pardon me?
Just a quick question. Are we not having any questions with the Pierce Transit folks tonight?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. We are now in the public comment portion of the agenda, and this is an opportunity for members of the public to provide comments to the City Council about any items not appearing on the agenda or on the consent agenda. At this point, I do have 2 names that signed up for comments. The first one is Mike and Sue. Okay, no comments? Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. And the second name is Caroline Belisi. If you still, okay, please come up, give your name, address, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I wasn't expecting to be here so soon to talk to Council. However, it just recently came to my attention that your retreat that's going to be held on the 27th of January is going to be held at the Red Lion or the Silver Cloud at Ruston Way. And I have some concerns about that from a public standpoint. Number one, it takes 20 minutes at a good speed to get there. So it's making it a little bit more difficult for your citizens that do want to participate to get there. But the bigger concern I have is that in order to attend this conference, citizens will have to pay for parking, $4 an hour or $38 for the day. You are asking for a burden to be placed on your citizens. Each and every one of you in attendance, including staff, will get reimbursed for your parking charges. Citizens will not. If we want open dialogue with our citizens and we want citizens to participate in the process, we need to make this as equitable and easy as we can. What was wrong with holding it at the Furcrest Country Club? It was within easy distance, it was free. But the Silver Cloud is also more expensive than our prior retreats. Again, we are spending more money from our coffers for council than we are for our citizens. Granted, it's not a huge sum of money, but it should be taken into account. Every dime that the city makes and has an excess revenue for should go to citizens, not to the pockets of the council. And by pockets, I mean in serving you as the council. You should be looking to spend that money to better the citizens. Set it aside to do added events, improve parks, do traffic improvements, those sorts of things, not in a retreat. I am fully in support of retreats. I think those retreats are needed to have open and honest conversation with each other. However, you should always take the citizens into account. You may not be violating the Open Meetings Act by having it at the Silver Cloud. However, the intent of the Open Meetings Act is to make it accessible to your community. And by putting a parking charge on your citizens, that is not making it open. You're placing a financial burden on some of your citizens that may choose to participate. I understand that you have additional retreats coming up in the upcoming months. I would like to request that you hold those meetings in the public space that was intended to serve for that purpose, and that you hold it on an off Monday as a special meeting so that our citizens know where and how to access these retreats. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else present? None coming up. Is there anybody online, City Clerk?
I don't see anyone online, Mayor.
Thank you. With that, I'm ending the public comments site and move on to 7A, consent agenda. I have a motion to approve or amend the consent agenda as proposed.
Mayor, I'd like to move to accept the consent agenda.
Thank you. And with that, I do have, there is an update that staff gave to me for item number C. And that if you look at item number C, there's two words that you authorize the city manager to execute a renewable and the word to, T-O. If you please delete those two words, that's the remaining portion is the actual item. And with that, are there any objections to approve the agenda as amended?
Mayor Figueroa, I would offer a second to that motion for approval of the consent agenda.
Okay, thank you. With that, thank you, sir. Is there any objection to approve the agenda as amended?
I have a question. Initially, you said amended, but we haven't amended it yet, right?
No,
I'm
I said
just
renew.
trying to understand the process so I know which one I'm voting on. So is it the,
We're just taking out the word renewable to,
Okay.
and it's just to execute the
okay.
agreement.
So we don't have to remove that one, just to
No,
amend the
no,
word?
we're not
So
removing
just-
it.
Okay,
We're just updating.
yeah, and then vote on it separately. So we're just.
No, we're not
okay.
voting on it separately. We're just,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, I just want to clear up the process. Thank
No,
you,
I
Mayor.
understand. It took me a while to get it too. Thank you. Thank you. And I don't see any other objections, or I don't see anybody up there. Nope. And when I say up there, whoever's looking at me, I'm looking at my two council members online, and the screen is way up there. So with that, the motion passes. Moving on to public hearing and council consideration. Item number 8, petition for right-of-way vacation. And we have a staff report by Jordan Martin, senior project engineer. And here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council. I'm Jack Eklund, Director of Public Works. With me is Senior Project Engineer Jordan Martin. Tonight we're bringing to you for public hearing a petition for right-of-way vacation over a portion of 29th Street West. In your council packet, you will find a memo summarizing staff findings and recommendation, map exhibits of the area, as well as a proposed ordinance associated with this request. And I now will pass the microphone over to Jordan to provide the staff report on this matter.
Good evening. Yeah, as Jack mentioned, we were petitioned by, the application was initiated by petition from the property owner. It requires 2/3 of the abutting parcel owners of the right-of-way to be vacated to sign it, which in this case is solely the parcel owner themselves. The parcel is located at 29th Street West and Crystal Springs Road West. And with the petition, we reviewed it against future improvements from the city standpoint, found no issues with if we were to come through with improvements. At that point, we contacted the local utilities in the area, Pierce County Sewer, Comcast, all the communications companies, and the Pierce County Sewer does own a 10-foot easement through the parcel to the back of the parcel, and they would request that that gets extended to the new right-of-way location. The City of University Place Planning Department had no issues with their comprehensive plan, and the Public Works Department also had no issues. There is a grass-lined swale there for drainage. This would not impede on that, therefore they had no issues as well. And with that, we provided the applicant with 3 appraisal companies of their choosing, and the appraisal came back at $26,000, which seemed fair for the property in question. And per the code, they're only required to pay half of that because we are not requiring them to, or we did not acquire the property through payment. So we only pay half of that, which would be $13,000. And we feel it's in our best interest to approve it. And I think that's all I have. If you have any questions.
Council, as always, is to, for clarification of the facts or a presentation. I know, if you want a map up there for him to go through it, please feel free at this point. There will be, under consideration, thorough discussion about anything else. So I'll go, just because we've got two people up there and it's hard to follow the hands, I'm going to go through the speaking chart, and that way everybody will get a chance. Fair enough? Okay. So Councilmember Boykin.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Let me just ask, I heard the comment that that the $26,000 seemed fair. Could you just walk me through the process as how it got to be a value that seemed fair?
We reviewed the appraisal provided by the applicant, and the process seemed to be, at least in my brief right-of-way appraisal experience. They used one of the appraisals that we provided, which was, I don't know the acronym off the top of my head, but they were state approved to do right-of-way appraisals in this kind of thing, so it appeared good.
Yeah, and if I could just add to it, it was consistent with the type of appraisal and the valuation that we would see in other projects in which it's the other, when we experience the other hand, when we have to acquire property ourselves. So it met all the objectives and is very consistent with past practices.
I appreciate it. If I could just ask one more
Go
question.
ahead, you have the floor.
So we typically in this process have a single appraisal, and based upon that, there was a consistency that the value was seemingly fair.
Yeah, how the process works for right-of-way vacation is we provide names of 3 firms. They choose one to get an appraisal. If the property owner does not agree with or thinks the appraisal is not appropriate, they do have an option to pay for a second appraisal if they so desire. In this case, that was not. They did not exercise that option, and so then just the one gets reviewed, and then the city staff will review it for consistent with the past practices.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And the next person is Councilmember Worthington.
Thank you, Mayor Figueroa. A couple of quick questions. So, Gordon, thank you for joining us. You had mentioned that it's half value, and while I think I have an understanding why, I was wondering if somebody could explain to the public just a little bit more about why it's rather than $26,000, the appropriate value in this case is $13,000.
I think we'll pass this over to our city attorney, because although we understand it, he can say it a little better than we can, I think.
So, thanks, Jack. The answer to your question, Councilmember Worthington, is because that's what our code says. Our code largely tracks state law in terms of acquisition or the vacation of right-of-way. There's 2 price points, if you will. There's the full value and then there's the half value. The half value under our code is triggered when we have not acquired the right-of-way at public expense. Our investigation onto this revealed that the right-of-way was dedicated by plat back in around 1895 or thereabouts. So there's no indication it was acquired at public expense. The full value under our code is acquired at public expense. There's a 3rd category in there, or 2nd category at full value. However, our code has not implemented that. So that's the distinction in price. And part of the reason why you have that cost differential, the way to think about the right-of-way vacation is, although we like to think we own the land, I'll put air quotes around the word own, the abutting property owner typically has an easement or still some sort of ownership interest in that land. So that valuation formula that we talked about generally reflects that both parties have some interest in there. What the vacation is, it's us giving up our interest, subject to any easements that we may reserve.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate hearing those details, and certainly that helps. In the future, we may have another vacation. We don't do vacations often, but occasionally they come up. And in certain circumstances, if the public received that as a dedication without paying for it, then we would expect it to be similar to this at half value. If not, then it may be a full value in the case of vacation. Is one way to think about that. Okay, good. One other quick question. You had mentioned that there's a swale that isn't impeded by this, and I think there may be some utilities in place as well. Those continue to exist under and continue to be used for under easement?
Yes. So with the exception of the sewer utility that would retain an easement, as Jordan mentioned, all the other utilities are outside of the requested area.
Okay.
This is an area of exceedingly wide right-of-way, so a typical right-of-way width that we see, probably something that's been generated after the 40s probably, is about 60 feet. But prior to that, and certainly in the 1800s, they were requiring 80-foot right-of-ways, so it is a much larger right-of-way than is typical and customary these days.
And I'm clear in understanding that neither the city engineer nor the existing street program requires or suggests that we might need that width in the future.
Yes, not for this street.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. And the next one in line is Councilmember McCluskey.
All right, thank you. Well, I have the same questions as Councilmember Worthington. However, I'll add sidewalks to that. If we were to put sidewalks in the future, this won't be impeded by that infrastructure if we were to go forward with that as well. There's enough in there. All right, perfect.
Yeah, so our standard width on that street with full improvements of sidewalks, and even if we added a parking lane, would be 57 feet of right-of-way. And so this one is still providing, well, it'd still be 70 right now, but theoretically, I guess the other side of the street wanted to vacate, we could be down to 60 even. So there's still quite a bit of room left.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Fleming.
Thank you. I have just a couple of quick questions, Jack. First one, typically when someone requests a vacation of a street, they have in mind construction to follow. What projects do you see coming down the pipeline for this particular property?
So this property is currently a vacant parcel. In fact, there's another parcel, I think, behind it that's also vacant, owned by this property owner. And it's our understanding that they're preparing to build single-family homes on each of the parcel. I believe that.
Yeah, this is an existing underlying lots is what was popular back in the day, and they did a lot combination on it to provide the two lots. So I think to meet the typical planning minimums is a 60-foot circle. You can see by just Exhibit B that it's only a 50-foot circle. And this kind of lot is kind of grandfathered in, I guess, to those minimums. We don't hold that to these underlying lot lines. So I believe the extra right-of-way is to just fit a normal house on there.
So how many, it's two lots, how many houses are you looking to approve on that?
Yeah, we haven't seen a specific proposal, but it's our understanding they're looking at constructing two individual single-family homes.
Okay. My last question is, the statement was made, it's in the best interest of the city to vacate this land. Why?
I think partly that's the test for passing the vacation, but in our case, it's essentially there's not an interest for us to hold it. And so by not having an interest of holding on to it, it's in the best interest to then revert it back to the property owner.
When you say revert it back, did the property owner have this property before and we took it for the street, or?
Theoretically, prior to the plat, it would have been private property. So that's, granted, this would have been from 1895, but yeah, that's kind of just the way you conventionally think of a right-of-way vacation. But so for them to purchase it, and then you also would, from an interest from our standpoint, would then increase the tax value of that property and get a little bit more on the tax rolls for it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thanks, Jack.
Okay, so next is Councilmember Grassi, and you're online.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to say thank you to my colleagues that have already echoed incredible comments, and especially Councilmember McCluskey regarding sidewalks. Thank you. And to Jack and his team for comprehensive and detailed pre-brief on this, and I really appreciate it. So thank you for covering details. I have nothing further.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Wood.
I have no questions, Mayor.
Okay. looks like this is working well for me. I do have a few, and so I didn't, my apologies for not thoroughly going through the appraisal, and I know a lot about appraisals. I know therefore, in this case, it's quite unique. Vacations are not easy to appraise because usually it's to take away from a larger piece that says, this is the value that you're taking away. So you don't have that. So I'll go to the other side, and that is, it adds a lot of value because the intent is to, without this piece, they would not be able to build what they intend to build. Is that my understanding?
They still would be able to build. It would just be considered a non-conforming lot, or they wouldn't be able to build as big as they would like. Although I would like to point out that the appraisal does essentially do the reverse of what we're typically used to, where when we're acquiring right away, you definitely go, what's the decreased value? In this case, they look at what is the increased value.
They did. Yeah. Okay, and that's really critical in this arena for us. As I heard the questions, is that we get paid what it would be the additional value for them to be able to get their lot permitted for what they want. So thank you. The other one is the zoning for that property. Was it what they needed to be, or does it need to? Was it zoned differently because we owned it and it was just city property? And so do they have to rezone it, or is it already rezoned for what they needed?
So in this case, the zoning of the right-of-way parcel will then shift to the zoning of the proper parcel that's acquiring it, and so in this case, it's a R1 zone, and it would remain as that.
Oh,
zone.
so that by default it changes. They don't have to apply for that. Okay, and then the last question is, what happens to the monies that we receive from the sale? Where does it go?
I believe it just goes into the general fund, is my understanding. Matt, if that...
There's a special requirement under state law, which I'm pulling up.
Thank you.
I wasn't ready. I think that's right. But
Jordan says our code specifies it goes back to the street fund.
Back to the street fund for maintenance and all that.
It could be programmed from either maintenance or capital, but
capital. Okay, thank you. Before I go to public comment, anyone else? I'll give a chance. Nope. So with that, we'll go to public comment. Anyone here or online that would like to provide public comment in regards to the petition for the right-of-way vacation? None seen coming up. City Clerk, anyone online?
Not online.
Okay, thank you. With that, I close the public hearing portion of this. So on to council consideration. May I have a motion, please?
Mayor, I'd like to move that the council pass an ordinance vacating a portion of 29th Street West as described.
Mayor Figueroa, I would offer a second to that motion.
Thank you both. And with that, I'm going to open up for discussion, and I'll start again. Just for fun, I won't go first, but I'm going to go in the opposite direction. And Mayor Pro Tem Wood?
I have no questions.
Councilmember Grassi?
No questions, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. Again, discussion, if you'd like to discuss it. Councilmember Fleming?
Nothing to offer, thank you.
Councilmember McCluskey?
I have no further questions, thank you.
And Councilmember Worthington?
Yes, Mayor Figueroa, a couple of quick things. One is certainly from my perspective, I think this is something we should do. The fact that we return property that does not have any particular purpose to the city, to the adjacent property owner who historically that parcel is associated with this, to me makes all the sense in the world to put in some sort of productive use and take it off, put it on rather the tax rolls. That gives the private property owner some opportunity to put the property use, and we don't have a claim to it. frankly, periodically we should, and I think we do, scrub our holdings, which is, say, our real property, and look for opportunities to divest ourselves of things we don't need. And I think that's a good practice. Glad we're doing it. Certainly I'll support it.
Very good. Thank you, Councilmember Worthington. So, along with Councilmember Worthington's comments, and that is that I do support it. I will be voting for it mainly because of the comments that were made earlier, and that is, oh, I missed Councilmember Boykin. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I greatly appreciate that. I did want to affirm that in asking about the process, what I wanted to make sure was transparent, that all the parties had been satisfied, where we would have interest and where we would make sure that we didn't have any challenges. There had been a clear, transparent process to ensure that that's where we landed. And it sounds as if all parties were satisfied before we moved forward. And so I'm just appreciative, and I'm absolutely in affirmative in terms of potential vote.
Very good. Okay, thank you. I apologize for that. So I do, and there's many reasons for that. And again, I think it's important for the public and for us to remember that even though we didn't pay for it, even though, but that is, why we are receiving half. The way it was appraised, and that is the added value to the other parcel, which is a good way to appraise it and provide value. But also, as mentioned, it goes to the property tax rolls. And I think that's always a good thing because they intend to improve that. We didn't intend to improve on that. And so why not, especially when talking about housing, and housing has been a big topic about additional housing in our city. So I think it's all good on that. And so with that, I'd like to move on to a council vote. And City Clerk, will you take a roll call, please? Vote.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Boykin?
Yes.
Councilmember Worthington?
Aye.
Councilmember McCluskey?
Yes.
Councilmember Fleming?
Aye.
Councilmember Grassi?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Wood?
Aye.
Mayor Figueroa?
Aye.
Vote result, Mayor, 6 ayes.
Thank you. Thank you all. We're pretty much on time here on our agenda. I like that. With that, the next item number 9, is City Manager and Council comments and reports. Our City Manager, Steve Sugg.
Yeah, a couple items, Mayor and Council. Recently, our University Place Police Department won a blood drive competition with their fellow first responders from West Pierce Fire. This blood drive competition called the Battle of the Badges was sponsored by Red Cross, which is headquartered here, just south of here on Bridgeport Way. Together, the two agencies, our police department and West Pierce Fire, donated enough blood to supply life-saving blood for 140 people. We're very pleased and proud of our officers and staff that at the police department that contributed blood. And thank you very much. And I also wanted to point out that Red Cross will be here on February 20th at the council meeting to present the trophy that will be held for this year until the next Battle of the Badges. One more item. You'll notice that 35th Street's under construction, curb, gutter, and sidewalk. This is a project that the council awarded the bid earlier in 2023. That project's under construction despite the fact that we're undergoing some very wintry weather. They're building retaining walls, et cetera, but they're continuing construction, and you'll see that throughout the winter. The end product will be worth the inconveniences, as minor as they are. But I just wanted to report that the project is not being shut down for the winter. They're continuing to work out there despite the weather. Thank you.
And we'll go down the line with Councilmember Boykin. You go first again.
Absolutely wanted to congratulate the effort in ensuring that the blood drive award had the outcome. I also want to personally say I wish I could have participated. Had a challenge with my own health, a little spatch of cold illness, and just did not want to spread that. But I was really excited about having a chance to participate and wish I could have. So again, congratulations.
Councilmember Worthington.
Thank you, Mayor Figueroa. A couple of quick things. And first off, join Councilmember Boykin with congratulations to Chief Burke and your team on representing us so well and bringing us continued pride here. I don't know why Chief Sharp isn't here. He often is, but I'm beginning to have an idea. But in any case, but good job. And though surprising, there's a lot of firefighters out there, but a good turnout by you and your team and their supporters. Again, I'm sorry I wasn't able to participate as well, but perhaps next time. I was just going to share with Council tomorrow is the RCC meeting, the Rainier Communications Commission meeting. I'm continuing as chair, as I think I mentioned, for another year, principally to see if we can get through the adoption of an interlocal agreement, updating that. That's in front of the RCC tomorrow with the Commission. And if the Commission agrees, then we'll be moving that on to the local adoption process, and you'll hopefully see that in an upcoming agenda. From my perspective, and if I may, from our city attorney's perspective, we believe it's worth considering at this point. So there'll be more conversation for you to formally consider that and see if you agree in the weeks to come, assuming that it gets to the Commission tomorrow. So, and with that, otherwise, off to a good start of the new year, and glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember McCluskey.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. I would also like to congratulate our police department for winning the blood drive, and also being, I think it was Channel 5 News had on YouTube, did a little snippet of the event, and also it was a event that happened all across our nation because they highlighted the fact that our blood supplies will only last about 3 hours in a really dire emergency. So it's so essential that we give the blood, the platelets, to help people survive. And I also found the stories interesting that were in need of blood and how that dramatically impacted their life, as well as had them continue living as well. So it's so important, and we do have the American Red Cross in our city and University Place, which I'm very proud to have. And also our former council member, Belisi, had a little cameo in it. If you looked in the very beginning of that feed, you would see her in the chair with a needle in her arm. So I'll end my comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Grassi.
Thank you, Mayor. I also want to extend my congratulations to Chief Burke. It was an honor to donate blood alongside you, and I'm pleased that I was able to be a part of saving 140 lives. That is an incredible amount of done. So congratulations. It was enjoyable to also see former Councilmember Belisi there as well. Thank you for giving of your time and participating. So I want to say extended thank you to the Red Cross for putting that together, and also met a couple of local small business owners that were a part of that as well. So thank you to our business community for also supporting that effort as well. But so important to get this message out. Our blood supply is at a vital low, and I'm pleased that we were able to make a difference. So thank you.
Thank you. And Mayor Pro Tem Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, offer my congratulations to the Police Department. I think we've covered that well. I would like to comment briefly on our citizen comment from Ms. Caroline Belisi regarding our retreat. And I think she raises a valid point about costs of parking for citizens in open government. And I would not want to have, or I guess I should phrase it as that in the future, I think we should look at wherever we decide to locate retreats on cost to our citizens for participation if they should choose to do so. That concludes my comments, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So with my comments would be, Chief, even though, as most of us know and the public should know, that is, we contract out to the Pierce County. Am I missing somebody over there? No?
Councilmember Fleming?
Councilmember Fleming, did I miss you?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to remind you I'm still a member of council.
Well, thank you somebody beat you to it. So thank you both over here, keeping me honest. Councilmember Fleming.
I appreciate it, Mr. Mayor. I think the comments for the blood drive have been well expounded on. I was just trying to picture in my head what does that trophy look like. I wonder if it's an IV bag with some IV lines on it. I don't know. But certainly well deserved since I'm allergic to needles. I applaud everyone else who participated in that program. As Council Member MTP Wood was expounding on, I do believe that and I don't think it was intentional, but as a reminder to council, when we do plan out our events, we need to keep in mind that the open door to the public is important, and any barriers we throw up to keep the public out is really not acceptable. So, when it comes to parking, perhaps we can have our city attorney look at how do we mitigate that for citizens who want to attend this upcoming event, or whatever we can do to keep the barriers down and the doors open for the public to participate in all of the council meetings, including the retreats. That's all I have to say tonight.
Thank you. And I'll continue with my comments with the chief. So, as most know, we have a contract with the Sheriff's Department for our law enforcement. And there's been a very positive legacy that, Chief, that you and your sheriffs in the past, and you continue that very well, and that's shown through the blood drive, and that is all the sheriffs that have served us have been like they either live here, and if they don't, it appears that they live here, and very much part of the community and the community family. And we do appreciate that, what you show as a leader of that department, and we thank you. Thank you. Just a little bit on that, though it hasn't come out because it's not time, but there's numerous retreats that are being planned, none of them at Silver Cloud for many reasons that was mentioned. But retreats are meant to be a very strategic thinking and planning, and for all the right reasons. It's done everywhere, and in many places that's the way, the cost of doing business. And so it was time. Faircrest is small, it's crowded, it's elbow room, and it needed to be changed. And if you look around, and we did, there's very few places that can be accommodating for our needs. And so for the first part of the year, that is, I believe, very essential that we have a place that we can really have the elbow room to stretch and work and plan and strategize for the rest of the year is critical. And so put that on me, and I thought it was the right decision. I still do think that, and understanding what everybody's thinking, I already thought about that, and there's no plans for the remainder of the retreats to be there. Probably it will be here, not even at Faircrest. But there's a need to have a place where this council can do some very, very important planning and strategic thinking that needs that room and the facility that will allow us to get there. And I stand by it. So thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to move on with a study session. And the first item on the study session is donation and sponsorship policy. And we have Mr. Matt Kaser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I have a PowerPoint, if we can get that pulled up. Awesome, thank you. So tonight we're going to be talking about donations and sponsorship policy. This is something that in various other formats, council's discussed often on, since even before the beginning of the pandemic. when we've been looking at various aspects. How do we do stuff, ranging the spectrum of how do we do events to how do we take in items, how can we leverage our branding, how can we leverage various other aspects associated with municipal processes. And given the fact that we had a pandemic, put everything on hold, and then now that we're kind of coming out of the pandemic, many of those issues that I had outlined a moment ago, they're still there. And as Council may even recall, just last week, you approved 2 agreements involving the inclusive playground. So these are issues that are ongoing. They take similar sort of forms, but it's probably appropriate to do a re-examination of our various policies and procedures. If I can get to the next slide. And what we're going to be talking about in broad strokes are really 2 things, and they're closely related. The first concept is the idea of donations. Donations, quite simply, as the slide indicates, it's when somebody gives us stuff. They may or may not include conditions that are associated with the donation. There are some donations where a donor will say you can use this for this purpose, for this length of time, and on these terms. Some just say, here, do something, and it might just be cash. On sponsorships, there's 2 forms of sponsorships that we're going to be talking about tonight. The first is the term of sort of city sponsorship. That's where somebody supports us. Typically, they want something in return that's not quite gifty. What they're usually looking at is advertising and other consideration. And for a lot of this, if you just think about advertising without getting caught up in the notions of sponsorship, it probably makes the head hurt just a little bit less. The second is the concept of third-party sponsorship. That's the notion where we would be asked to sponsor various other people's events out there in the community or elsewhere in the larger area at large. Again, typically in exchange for advertising and branding. If I get the next slide. So part of the reason why we have policy is, and this is going to probably be hopefully this is the extent of the legal part of tonight's discussion, is because there are some laws that govern and provide some framework for it. The first part is under state law, under RCW 3521-100. If we choose to accept donations, it has to be done via ordinance. Now, there's 2 ways that jurisdictions will typically do this. The first is they can provide for a provision in their municipal code that says, here's our generalized policy associated with donations. The second and more cumbersome process is every time that a donation comes forward, the legislative body passes an ordinance accepting that particular donation. University Place has, and we'll talk about here in a second, has chosen the first path, that we have provisions in our code that speak to the acceptance of donations. The second legal part, and we'll talk about this more in the concept of sponsorships, is there's a provision in the state constitution. Many of you are familiar with it, the gifting of public funds doctrine, which serves as a limitation on just how far we can go. And we'll talk about that here in a few minutes as we get to that point. If I get to the next slide. So let's talk about what we have on the books right now. What we have on the books right now is, I'm trying to do the math in my head. What is that, 20 some odd years old? And it is probably a relic of its particular times. The full provision of the relevant code language, University Place Municipal Code 440-270, is included in your packet materials. It's buried deep in the finance code. When we're talking about funds and what pots of money we're talking about and how we allocate funds. Under the language of that code, the code provides simply that the city manager is authorized to accept all donations, so long as it's not inconsistent with anything that we've got out there. That's what the code has said, and that's what it's largely said since 1997. Here's the problem, and there's a couple of problems. The first is that we haven't always been following that provision of the code. As council may recall from some of our more recent significant donations, where outside groups have donated objects to us, and I'm thinking more in forms of, if you think back to the Forever Friends statute that's currently at the Apple Orchard, if you're thinking about the piano that's located on the ground floor, the Sea to Sky structure that's in our atrium, if you're thinking about the duck sculpture, and most, if not all of those, council has said, hey, we want to be the final authority. That's fine, but when you have a code process, there's usually two approaches if you're not following the code. The first is either we start following the code, or the second is we change the code. The approach I'm advocating tonight, and that's included in your materials, is to change the code and come up with a process that's more consistent with what our actual practice largely has been. Because we've been following the same piece of code since 1997 or thereabouts. The second part is our current code has left a number of unanswered questions. And some of those questions are not that surprising. What do you do with a donation that has outlived its useful life? You know, do you keep it? Do we surplus it? Do we attempt to return it? What do you do with it? What do you do if somebody says, here's a donation, and then we decided to put it to one use, but they say, well, I really meant for it to be for another use. What do you want to do with that? So our code doesn't answer those questions. The proposed policy that is included in your packet tonight attempts to get to those questions. And with that, if we can get to the next slide. So the proposed changes include that there's a lane for both the manager, the city manager, as well as the city council. With the city manager accepting cash and non-monetary donations at a threshold dollar figure and setting a threshold, just like you do with the purchasing policy. The proposed threshold in the policy that you have in front of you is at $10,000. If council wants to say that's too high, you can change that number. If it says too low, you can change that number. But a number was put in there just kind of as a starting point. And then there is also a portion in the code that has no cap that the city manager could accept for non-monetary donations that support specific city events. So what does that mean? What that generally means is if we got a specific city event and somebody says, you know, take concerts on the square. And somebody says, I'd like to donate this to the concerts on the square. Regardless of the dollar figure, because it's for a specific event, city manager could accept. In all other instances, if it's not on that list, it goes to council. The draft policy expressly ensures that council has a say on any donations of real property, regardless of value. So if we find ourselves in a scenario where somebody wants to donate a chunk of old land or whatever, regardless of what the appraised value on it may be, council accepts. If it's at $10,001 under, or whatever other benchmark that council sets, it comes back to council for acceptance. So that's where the proposed delineation is with respect to that. The second bullet point answers the question, what are donations used for? And the answer is straightforward, that it's used for any purpose unless we say otherwise has a condition of acceptance. And we've run into that issue, you know, in some other instances where somebody says, well, I'd like to donate a park bench, you know, and they say, well, I want to donate a park bench to the city. Great. It's for a municipal purpose. It may be intended for Park A, but if we want to move it to Park B, unless we've agreed otherwise, we can make that move, you know, for whatever reason, because at the end of the day, it's a municipal donation. The third prong is, what do you do with it once it's ultimately done, when you've used up the donation, as it were? It would be surplus according to our standard processes, depending on what the end of the day value would be, if there's any utility to it left, that sort of thing. We may, but we're not obligated to notify the original donors. And where that has popped up in particular is, as you may recall, a couple of years ago, we demolished Windmill Village. There was specific donations for some bricks. And then the question that we actually had to try and answer, to the best of our ability, is what do you do with the donors associated with those bricks that were donated to the city some time ago? Do you call them all up individually, or what process? And our then Public Works Director made attempts to contact original donors and the like. But at the end of the day, what's that obligation? I mean, if you analogize it to akin to a gift or other donation, it would indicate that we could, but we're not required to notify those original donors that its use has otherwise expired. And then with respect to those donations that may be hitting their end of their utility, strictly clarifies that we're not under an obligation to repair or replace those donated items. So if you go back to that park bench, if that park bench has fallen apart, we're not under an obligation to repair or replace. We make the decision whether we want to repair or replace or move on to the next item for whatever that might be. So that's the general framework of what we're looking at associated with the donation piece. If I can get to the next slide. So sponsorship of city events is probably slightly easier. We've actually been doing this for some time. And I used the Concerts on the Square example a few minutes ago, and hat tip to our communications department for coming up with this photo. Because what we've been doing is, if you go back to what I started with my opening comments, where folks are advertising, and using opportunities to advertise, leverage, and the like associated with our events. We recognize in the draft policy that the city manager can accept whatever that threshold might be. The draft policy has it at $10,000. Clarifies that if there's special recognition, we'll recognize you. You can put up banners, signs, and whatnot, including your logo. However, it's done in such a way that it doesn't suggest city endorsement. That is to say that we don't say we endorse this sponsor and they're the greatest. They're the you see, like with sporting events, somebody's the official X of whatever sports league they are. We're making sure that that's not the case. That's kind of the thing that we're trying to make sure that we're avoiding. The sponsorship of city events is something we've been doing for a while without a clear policy, but what we have done is largely consistent with the policy that's being proposed. Trickier is what we're going to talk about on the next slide. Next slide, please. Where we've done we are involved with sponsorship of third-party events. Again, this is something we have done for some time. Again, hat tip to our communications department. They found a UP festival advertising back from 2001. If you look very closely, keeping with the advertising theme in there, and it might require you to actually blow up your packet, you will note that the City of University Place is featured in there if you squint very, very hard for credit. I'll give you a hint, it's in the jukebox. But what we're looking at when we're talking about sponsorship of events is we're looking at probably one of four things that we can talk about. The first is the use of facilities without charge or reduced cost. We have a number of facilities that are available, including our parks and the like. Two is promotion and publicity by the city. This is something where we would indicate, hey, we're sponsoring or we're a sponsor of an event. And then that we could push that out on typically on our social media feeds or the like. We talk about the issuance of special events permits at no or reduced charge. While not clear sponsorship, we have done this. I can think of it one other occasion with respect to Veterans Memorial Plaza, where it's part of the MOU between us and that group. I think we've waived the fee associated with them holding a number of events there, as set forth in that agreement. And then the fourth criteria is that we don't make financial contributions, and this goes back to that concept associated with the gifting of public funds, unless, of course, we can determine that it doesn't violate the state constitution or other provision of law. When we're talking gifting of public funds, there's usually two things that the courts and, more importantly for us, the auditor is looking at. They're looking at, one, does it fulfill a fundamental government purpose? And two, they're looking at, are we doing it with donative intent? That's the magical phrase, donative intent. And sponsorship of events, provided that they meet community needs, generally have been held to qualify. But what this proposed policy shows, we'll get to it in the next slide, is what sort of guardrails are there associated by which we might be willing to consider something along the lines of third-party sponsorship. And in looking at this, we've identified 7 different factors. For members of the council, if this looks familiar, it should. But it might require a bit of a trip in the Wayback Machine. This was something that council had discussed, albeit pre-pandemic, back in January 2020 retreat with these 7 factors. And a lot of these factors is sort of a break from the city's historical practice where we've identified, yay, we like this particular group. And more in terms of a transition to, let's talk about the event. How does the event serve the greater needs of the residents and citizens of the city of University Place? Although, to be sure, there are some who-type questions in there. The first and foremost is, and these are drafted with sort of an overriding question in mind. And that question in mind is this an event that the city council feels comfortable associating with? And that you feel comfortable with your logo on their advertising and their materials. From that question, you see the 7 criteria that are identified. and set forth in the proposed policy. First is it consistent with our various goals? That's kind of job one. If it's not consistent with those goals, it probably won't qualify. And you'll notice that there's a lot of shoulds in here because these are not hard sets, but these are the sort of things that are going to keep you generally out of trouble, recognizing that council at the end of the day has final say. The second is that the free and open to the public. The idea is that if the city is putting the ore in the water, making sure that there's public access for it. They should demonstrate community pride and involvement. We want to put on events and be affiliated with events and sponsors that we're proud of. The fourth meets First Amendment or satisfies First Amendment criterion with ensuring that those events don't have a religious or political purpose, and it keeps us out of trouble with the Public Disclosure Commission. The fifth is the first of the who questions, in that those organizations are based in UP or at least have some connection to the community. So we're not sponsoring something that might be up in Whatcom County, to pick a very flippant type example. That it's something closer to home. Six, we want to make sure that they have a demonstrated history of participation here in the University Place community. And seven, ensure that they're nonprofits or equivalents. That or equivalence is intended to give council a little bit of flexibility, particularly if there are other governmental organizations involved that we may be asked to, combine with. If I can get the next slide. The process on this would be a written agreement. Council had some experience with this in late in 2023 with an agreement regarding the use and sponsorship of the atrium for a community event. Recognizing, of course, that a minimum the agreement would ensure that they adhere to policies. Again, second, going back to that advertising piece. Because if we're putting something in, there's something that should be coming out. And I searched high and low for a good demonstrative. Where a bunch of other jurisdictions have gotten on, and I found this one, where you can kind of see at least the concept of what we're looking at. That if you're advertising the event in print, and you've seen these in different formats, different flavors, where the sponsor and local government, they're credited together with other appropriate sponsors, just as a demonstrative. I wanted one with a lot of government sponsors in there. And three, that they address provisions for access to the event by the public. And that goes back to the idea that if we're putting our ore in that water, that the public has either no charge, or if there is a charge, heaven forbid, that it's otherwise addressed. Next slide. I'm almost done here. There are a couple other miscellaneous issues that will pop up in the course of this. We've seen it peripherally associated with the inclusive playground, and we may see it come up again, and that's the concept of naming rights. And just a recognition that there's this concept out there with naming rights, and making sure that if it involves that, it needs to be council approved, that that's well outside the city manager's authority. Naming rights is nothing unusual. However, it is a bit unusual for us because we haven't really been there associated with naming rights. And then just a recognition of special privileges. Just because you make a donation or enter into this doesn't convey you to any special privileges or anything. And that's something that we've seen some issues with both here, and we've seen it with other jurisdictions, just making it clear associated with that. So with that, if I get to the last slide, I think the last slide is questions. With that, I know council's going to have questions, and for that, fire away. I'll yield to council.
Okay. Before we go in that direction, I just wanted to, this is a lot. We gave it a half an hour because, as you can see, we're going to be just on time. We gave it a half an hour, understanding that we will have at least 2, if not 3, study sessions on this to get it down to where what is the direction, what is it that we want in this ordinance, and the direction we want to give to staff to bring before for consideration. So I see this, if you can indulge me on this, I see this as being a first report with some clarification from a 13,000-foot level and clarification and questions. And then we can take this back individually, absorb it, look through it after what we heard. We understand where we're heading here, and then come back in the second study session, and we'll provide more time that time, an hour and a half, to really dive in with, and you also have one-on-ones as well, that we can get this down to hopefully the next study session to provide direction, if not the third study session, to complete this task. So with that, I'd like to...
Can I piggyback on your comments, if I may?
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think part of where, at least from the staff perspective, where we're looking at is this right path? Is this wrong path? Is this something that council says we want to go forward on something resembling this, or let's just bag it? I think that's from the staff perspective where we're interested in at least hearing a lot of the comments, or are there tune-ups along the way?
Correct, because we could say we don't want anything. We don't want an ordinance in this.
But you can say it.
Yeah, right. So with that, if we can take, we had this item until 8, but we can take 10 minutes for some big clarifications, questions, and then understanding that we still have plenty of time in the next study sessions. So with that, Councilmember Boykin.
At this time, Mr. Mayor, I would just defer. No questions. I'd rather have another opportunity with the subsequent study session and then provide questions that are more pinpointed.
Thank you. Councilmember Worthington.
I'm trying to make this pretty much on the big picture side, not really get into questions so much as just initial comments, which is, I think it's a good thing to do. The idea of having a threshold, maybe it's 10,000, maybe it's different for the city manager. But right at the moment, 10,000 could be it. I would like to see us more explicitly deal with real property donations, because I think it has its own set of conditions, and I think the state helps us with that, but at least to acknowledge that, or just to talk about that in the context of a donation. I think the goals that are outlined are interesting. The last 3 are problematic to me, 5, 6, and 7, but now's not the time to get into that, other than say that I think they're problematic. I can see some examples in all of this we need to talk about, but I'm going to hold that. I would also mention, it's good for us, by the way, to keep in mind for the public that donating to a municipality is a tax-free donation, which is to say there's a tax benefit in making the donation as there is to any other charity. A lot of folks aren't aware of that, but it is in fact how the tax code works. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember McCluskey.
All right, thank you. I think we're going along the right path here, and many of the bullet points that, as far as the donation, the sponsorships go, I would like to look at a couple things and maybe loosen up some of the ties so that maybe there might not be strong history with University Place. You know, kind of along the lines Councilmember Worthington is going with the bullet points of the 5, 6, and 7, especially 7 to clarify what other organization outside of that may be of the interest of this beneficial to the city to create a sponsorship. I'm also looking a little bit forward in my mind's eye of possible, a sponsorship of a recreational program or activities and things of that nature. Demonstrate community pride and involvement, a little more understanding of what that really looks like. I know what it looks like in my mind's eye, but that's just one perspective. What actually is that? So a little more definition on those things so that I can have a visual of what does it look like, boots on the ground, because I don't want to exclude, or if something really wonderful comes up, I don't want to exclude that. I want that to be part of our city and for our citizens to be beneficial of. And then also, what does a banner look like that doesn't show city sponsorship, for that? Because I think once you stamp our logo on it, we do own it. We have some meat in the game at that point. And the other things in the proposed changes, about the dollar amount for the city manager. I know there's some things in our city that may be, quite dear, historical, that council may want to have a say in or a buy-in to that. I do understand that once a donated item has outlast its usefulness, that we do have that understanding with whoever donated it to us, that's a possibility that it, it won't exist into perpetuity, to have that piece to that. So just kind of on the surface, those are some of the things that were popping into my mind as you were going along in your discussion of this. But I do encourage for us to have a policy, but not make it so restrictive. Thank you.
Councilmember Fleming, I did not forget. I've learned my lesson. I've learned my lesson, sir.
Since this is a conversation at the 50,000-foot level, I just have 3 comments for Matt. First and foremost, thank you for revisiting this. I know there was an attempt back in the late 90s, as you pointed out, to have a policy in place by which the city could either accept donations or participate as sponsorships. But I like Councilmember McCluskey stated, I like the pathway you're going down to really put some meat around this concept and this idea. The thing that I would ask you to take a second look at, though, as you start to pour a little concrete on this, is number one, in your criteria, you state that the organization that is requesting partnership or sponsorship by the city has to be a 501c3. Although I can't give you an example right now where an organization may not be, I would hate to have a policy where we exclude citizens or citizen groups that are working in good faith and wanting the support of the city. So take a look at a pathway by which an organization that is not a 501c3 could still gain that entry as for the support from the city. The other one point I wanted to make is on the naming rights. I know there's organizations out there that are looking at naming rights for various things within the city. I noticed in your presentation it was pretty vague compared to the other areas that you elaborated on. So I'd like to see something with a little bit more detail in terms of what, if an organization or individuals wanted to come before the city or the council for naming rights, what are really some of the criteria that we want to look at to either say yes or say no to? And then my last comment is, while we do have those one-on-ones that allows us to express some of our ideas that we have, I do want to keep this in the public eye, since this really involves the public in the community with regards to our comments in terms of what we see as important or not important as we develop this policy. But I definitely like and support the direction we're going, so thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Grassi.
Thank you, Mayor. I echo the other sentiments here. I like the direction this is going. I'm passionate about finding clear pathways for our community to be engaged in these efforts. And I know we're still at the 50,000-foot level, so just a couple of comments. I do agree with Councilmember Fleming regarding the non-501c3 option. Also, demonstrated history with our city. I really feel like there needs to be clear definition around that, especially opportunity for new endeavors in our city. I want to make sure that we are giving a clear process for variety, for people, and this is a huge communication, as echoed by Councilmember Fleming, really has to be clearly communicated to our community, the process for each one of these, whether it is a donation, a sponsorship, and also giving the opportunity for variety. I think that we need to look at how we decide if someone has first rights of refusal on continuing sponsorship, how we give other growing new opportunities to sponsorships as well. And as far as the no obligation to give feedback to the donors, no obligation to inform them should a previous donation be of no longer use. I do think that we want to look at that, because the idea of a donor is that once they start to donate, once they're in that, they like to be a repeat donor. And so I would hate to limit ourselves by not giving them information. Hey, this has outrun its course, but we do need an upgrade. We do need it in this area. We could use it in X, Y, Z. I think communicating with donors, communicating with our community is key, because once they've started down that path, sponsorship, donorship, they're most likely to repeat it. And we need to honor those efforts and maximize them as much as possible. So I'm excited about this direction. I'm excited to engage further with staff and have continued conversations.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. This is 50,000 foot, so I've got some questions, but I do have a number. But you don't need to answer them now, just things I would like to ask about. First, how would this apply in an emergent situation? Cascadia earthquake, private organizations are bringing truckloads of donations. Do we really want to bring the council together to say, yes, you can dump off all the food, water, and baby clothes, or is there a provision we can put in there that says, yes, we can just, city manager, somebody can just accept on behalf of the city at that point without active council? Or if there's other law that applies in that situation?
There's another one that we can get to without getting into the weeds right now.
Got it, thank you. As far as when the city council should weigh in, one thing I'd definitely like us to look at is if the donation has the potential to incur a future cost to the city. You mentioned that somebody donates something, there's no obligation on us to maintain it. But if somebody donates a duck statue, the expectation that the city won't maintain it because it's in our public square is, I think, a little, we're going to maintain it. And so just understanding incurred future costs to the city, whether it's real property, a city icon, something like that, we should, I would like the council or somewhere to weigh in on those things. If we set up a memorandum of agreement with an organization to say run a youth sports recreation thing for our city, does that MOA supersede this code, or is it would be held through under another provision? Just a question I'm going to ask.
It would be held under a different provision because I would think that such an MOU, they can work side by side.
Got it. Okay, I won't ask the specific question. I'll save that for another one. Is there anything in state law that would apply that prevents a city from asking for donations? And I'm bringing this up because I know under federal law there's certain, we can't ask for donations to support the federal government. But I'm curious about state or city level.
I have an answer. I'm reluctant to share it because I want to cross-check something.
Next meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Excellent. More for me, the comments were very thoughtful. I really liked them, and I don't have any, I said 13,000 foot level, guys, and you got 50,000. I'm really interested to see what the 13,000 foot level conversation would look like. But that being said, they were very thoughtful. I think based on what we normally do is provide you direction. I think what I heard is this council, as a majority, if not all of us, are looking forward to seeing something, a consideration brought forward in the future after some more studies. And what I also heard is that provide more meat and samples of what it may look like is what I heard. And I think that's what we can do along with what they'll bring back as far as some details. Is that fair enough, Council? Excellent. Okay, with that, we'll move on to the next study session, item 11, which is zoning code amendments. Kevin Brisky and Kenneth George. Hey, Steve. Can you bring that water, please? Okay. You're on the time clock.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Kevin Brisky with the Community and Economic Development Department, here tonight with Kenneth George, Senior Planner with the Department, to go over some zoning code cleanup and zoning code text amendments. This is a study session. We have 7, next slide please. We have 7 amendments to take a look at. And at the Mayor and Council's discretion, we'd like to just go through it each one individually, and after each one, open it up for questions.
Just real quick, if I may clarify for all of us, and that is, it's normally on here, and my bad for not pointing it out here, and that is I don't believe is this our first study session?
Correct.
Okay, so I was trying to mark to remind us that is the first study session, just like the donation and sponsorship policy first study session. We haven't had one before. So thank you.
And, just for a little background before we get into the 7 different amendments, this was part of the work plan for the Planning Commission. So these 7 amendments are recommendations we're bringing to you from the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission held 2 meetings regarding these amendments, including a public hearing. These amendments are cleanup type amendments. They weren't necessarily overly arching policy type changes. These are several of these are related directly to our form-based code implementation. So there's some irregularities and things that we needed to get in here that when we did that large overhaul, we're finding that we needed to correct as we go through here. And then a couple of them are just some cleanup from some other revisions that were made. So with that, I'd like to turn the first amendment over to Kenneth.
Next slide. Thank you very much, Mayor Figueroa, Mayor Pro Tem Wood, and council members. Kenneth George, Senior Planner for the Community and Economic Development Department. I'm going to take the first 2, and the first one before you.
Before you continue, I want to make sure our council members are on the same page as you are with their, anybody need to, paper-wise, or you want to follow the screen? I just want to make sure some people like to follow on paper and they're not ready. Is everybody ready? Okay, go ahead.
All right, thank you. The first one before you is screening of inoperable vehicles. This is a cleanup type amendment. And just a little bit about the presentation format on each of these slides. You'll see the format. It goes, there's a bit of a background on the code section, what the current code says, why we're proposing the change, and then there's a second one which will be on the second slide of this, or last item, that'll say what the proposed amendment is. So that format will follow on each of these items. A bit of the background here, just so everyone has a baseline. The city, for inoperable vehicles, and these are vehicles that, for apparent reasons, aren't allowed to be on the road or can't, operate on the road. We have a definition for that in our land use code. That those are allowed to be parked or stored on residential property. However, they must be screened in either a structure or some type of screening. So they must be inside of an enclosed structure if they want to store an inoperable vehicle on the residential property, or screened, and they can be screened by a solid fence or landscaping. The subject of this amendment is isolated to just the landscaping portion of that. There's no proposed amendments to the rest of the code. The current code simply says that it ties it into our landscaping chapter. So this accessory use section, if somebody wanted to try screening it, then the code says that it requires level 3 landscaping. And in our landscaping code, we have 4 levels of landscaping that varying degrees of ornamental landscaping to up to a dense screening type of landscaping. And why we're making this change, that the landscape levels, those titles 1, 2, 3, and 4, those were swapped back in 2001, where it used to be that the densest landscaping was level 3, and that's why the accessory use section said level 3 landscaping. But in 2001, the landscape chapter was swapped, and so level 1, being the first, was now the densest type of landscaping, all the way down to the ornamental, which ended up being level 3. And apparently that the accessory use chapter, which if you look at the code reference is drilled down, it's a very obscured reference, that was overlooked and never changed. So we would like to propose, next slide please, that we correct that finally some years later and simply make the change, strike out the level 3 landscaping that is required to screen an inoperable vehicle stored on residential property to level 1, and that level 1 would be consistent with our landscaping chapter, which you can see on the screen at the bottom. Level 3 is the ornamental landscaping, and these are straight out of the code section here, and level 1, or level 3 is the ornamental, level 1 is the visual screen. and it's intended to provide a dense screening so that it can't be seen. And that's the end of this particular proposed amendment. So we can pause for discussion and questions.
Do you want to take questions a page at a time, or?
Yeah, we were proposing one item at a time. So we have 7 amendments that we would just propose.
Okay, so this is the first amendment.
This is
Okay,
the first
fair,
one, yep.
fair enough. With that, instead of going through every one of them, I'm going to be looking up to the other 2 council members. So I see a little yellow hand already, but down here, if Melody, are you able to press that yellow hand as well? Okay, good. So if I see a yellow hand, I'll call on you, and over here, just raise your hand, and I'll try to keep up. If not, bug me. Okay, so Councilmember Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. George, looking at these 2 proposals that are up here, you're looking at eliminating landscape level 3, and it says ornamental. Is that a fence we're looking at? And if so, why would we want to eliminate the fence if that was the best cost-effective only means a homeowner had to screen versus putting up the vegetation?
Well, just a quick clarification. We aren't proposing to eliminate the level 3 landscaping. We're proposing that the inoperable vehicles code section references level 1 instead of level 3. And for that little diagram, it's quite an old diagram, I'm assuming, that's actually an office building shown there.
Oh.
And so the ornamental effects for an ornamental landscaping isn't intended. It's supposed to show that if you had a nice office building, that you have nice landscaping that accents that, but not necessarily screen it. And that's sort of the example for a level 3, which is still going to be in place in the landscaping code to address all the rest of the code and other requirements to landscape, but just for this inoperable vehicles screening code, we're proposing to clean this up and make sure that it references level 1 instead of level 3.
So you specifically were looking at how do we put up some kind of a barrier, if I restate what you're trying to do, a barrier, whether it's thick vegetation or a fence or something that so you can't see the vehicle.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Worthington.
Thank you, Mayor Figueroa. A couple of quick questions, just trying to not take too much time on this one. Essentially, we have just an error in the code that's been in place for 23 years, and we're going to get that cleaned up and put the right number in its place. But it doesn't really change how we've been enforcing the code, or at least what our intent was to enforce the code as council or from the staff's recommendation. So is this at all zoning dependent? Does it depend on what zone this is in?
Yeah, this particular code is specific to residential property only.
All right, so we shouldn't think of it as applying to commercial, even though that might be an illustration that we have. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm done.
Okay. Councilmember McCluskey.
Oh, thank you. Well, Councilmember Worthington just stated my comments, so I'll give the floor back to you.
Anyone else? I don't see anyone else. Okay, so moving on.
Next slide, please.
Okay. The next slide, I was able to get everything all in one slide, so everything you have, all the information you have before you is on this one slide. This one is another cleanup item for food trucks. The Planning Commission this last year looked at a number of ways to allow food trucks, but the background of this is that the current code has no definition or reference of food trucks whatsoever. So the department does occasionally get calls on, hey, I'd like to put a food truck here or there, and we've made that interpretation that it is a temporary use, although it's not referenced anywhere in the zoning code. So we've interpreted it to fall under our temporary use section, and that temporary use is limited to 45 days in a 12-month period. And in that code is listed a number of examples for that it's similar to Christmas tree sales, fireworks sales, flower stands, a lot of these temporary uses, since no food trucks and food truck type of uses is not defined in our code currently. That's where we've landed on still kind of allowing them as a temporary use. So the Planning Commission did look at allowing them for a year-round option or other various ways of regulating these. But ultimately, the recommendation from the Planning Commission is simply to update our code consistent with how we've been operating and allowing them as a temporary use and putting a definition in there. So the proposal before you is simply to put a definition of a food truck in our code so that our code is a little bit more up to date, and if residents or other people ask about whether or not we allow a food truck in the city, we can then point them to a definition, and we can point to the temporary use code, which would still be 45 days in a 12-month period. We've also we ended up doing in our research, we ended up falling on a definition adapted from the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department's definition. So it's actually very similar to what the Health Department uses in their definition, which has also turned out to be pretty similar to what other jurisdictions that do have a food truck reference in their code. So the change proposed before you is just to add a definition of the food truck and a couple of standards that the Planning Commission landed on when we reviewed this, and still operate the same way as we do currently with food trucks. And that's it for this section.
We'll do the same thing. I see a finger already pointing up over here. So Mayor Pro Tem, you're first.
First, support adding the definition makes all kinds of sense. And we don't need to do this now, but in the future, I would like to understand why the Planning Commission decided to just stick with the 45 days in a 12-month period for a food truck. I know that's not relevant to what we're doing right now. We're just adding a definition, which is fine. But I am interested in what the thought process was behind that, because I'm not understanding why they would just restrict it that way. So thank you.
Would you like to comment on that before we move on?
I can comment a little bit about it. We did look at that. In fact, the Economic Development Commission looked at it as well. The Planning Commission ultimately was split a little bit on it. Some were in favor of a year-round option, or at least maybe a 60-day or 90-day option, just playing around with that. And others were not in favor of it, or they were more in favor of doing more research than what was allowed at the time. One of the options was to, if the council was interested, to provide a study of food trucks or a survey. I believe this came from the chair, Graybill, whose comments were that we have a lot of standards, high quality standards for brick and mortar restaurant type buildings, and then we have very limited or zero standards for food trucks. And there's a little bit of a rub there, he believed, and thought a good quality survey of the existing restaurants or a little bit more research in this would be warranted before recommending any other length of time to the city council.
Okay. Thank you.
Any follow-up on that?
Not at this time.
Okay. Councilmember McCluskey.
Hey, thank you, Mayor. In line with Mayor Pro Tem, I was also wondering about the 45-day period, because I have read in several instances where food trucks add value, and to look at that particular piece to it, and because we do have quality standards, and we don't want the food trucks that may take away from the local businesses or the look and feel of our city as well. But in some instances, we may want to consider the food trucks for a longer period of time. I'm just doing the far reach of Chambers Bay during the summer. I would love to have an espresso stand out there. I think it could be very popular if it, comboed it with, ice cream or something. But But anyway, that's, jumping into the future so that we're not as restrictive. But in the allowance, the restriction is in the quality standards and not taken away from the look and feel in our community. And the other question I had is that the food truck here typically has wheels and axles and things, and that term is not defined in that. It says movable vehicle. It could be a trailer, but I'm just thinking a piece to that, if it doesn't have wheels and axles, our requirement is that would have a permanent foundation. And what would that be to it? So to exclude that piece, so it's truly a mobile enterprise that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not somebody that will lay some cement down on a piece of property with some electrical units and then rotate food trucks in and out of there. Anyway, that's kind of my thoughts. I know I'm looking at Mr. Brisky and he's like trying to follow me, but I can clarify that in our one-on-ones too, of what I'm thinking about as prohibiting in our city to ensure that it is truly a, mobile food truck enterprise. Right. Thank you.
Okay, so next is, excuse me. Yeah, correct, I got it down here. Thank you. And trying to see where we're at here. 2, 3. So, Councilmember Grassi.
Thank you, Mayor. I also echo sentiments of Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember McCluskey regarding the 45 days. I'm in favor of adding this definition of food truck, but also would like to look at the option of that 45 days to be extended for brick and mortars that are already existing in our city. If there is a local business that wants to have an opportunity to have another location, to test R&D through adding a mobile unit to their already existing, if they are a business that is pre-existing in our city, that there should be some discussion around that as well. But I would like to discuss further in one-on-ones, but thank you for the thoughtful work on it already. And I do think this is a lot of the way of the future for a lot of businesses, especially young entrepreneurs that are wanting to start and want to make a way for us to do it in a way that is reflective of our city as well, keeping with our standards. So thank you.
I'm just taking note here. Thank you. And Councilmember Fleming.
Thank you. Kevin, quick question for you. When I look down here at the standards, I know we were looking at the health department as guidelines, but where it says the mobile food unit shall be located on a hard surface. So, when I think about like examples for Lakewood Fun Days or whatever they call it over there, when they have their food vendors out during their summer festival, I've noticed in the past they've had those parked on the grassy areas of parks. If we adopt this proposal, we wouldn't be allowing that. So if we had to the future, if we had a ginormous kind of festival for University Place, trucks like that would not be allowed on any grassy areas of our parks. Is that your intent for that?
I believe your statement would be correct from the way I read the proposal, is it would not be allowed then on a grass area. And that was just some discussions at the planning commission level that it should be, in a paved parking lot or some area that. But that's a good consideration for us to look at that, and maybe we can word that differently if that's a proposal from the council.
Well, I like to do things that are rational and make sense. So I'm not quite grasping the idea that it has to always be on a hard surface. I think there will be those exceptional cases, and if we can look at some language that accommodates that. I get we don't want to put food trucks or anything that's going to be on a surface that's going to cause it to get stuck. But, under certain circumstances on a temporary basis, we should have some sort of a provision in place to allow for that. So what I'm trying to say is don't be so restrictive and so narrow or myopic in how we look at this, but just take a look at those exceptional cases and see if there's room to accommodate for that.
Yeah, and the one option for that is the areas that you're discussing would most likely be on a city park, which are handled through a special events permit for that. And at that time, then we would look at it through the special events permit to make sure that it would be placed in at least a drivable, accessible location.
Then if we, and I like that, if we go down that pathway, then what you want to do is ensure that if we adopt this proposal that's before us, that we don't create a conflict in codes, so that the codes will complement, not conflict one another. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Very good, sir. Okay. Councilmember Boykin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to affirm that I believe, based upon the discussion, how it was that the Planning Commission had such a robust discussion and ultimately were split as to how they might move forward. I think it was first things first, being prudent to ensure that there was a food truck definition is the most important thing, and then seeing that the consistency was which was offered was consistent with existing, in this case, Tacoma Pierce County Health Department's definition. I also wanted to say that I think it is also prudent to talk about it being a temporary use first, because we really want to be confident as we move through this effort, and as excited as I am about entrepreneurial opportunities, we want to be really clear about if we're going to move into this space, unless there is jurisdiction, and I'm pretty confident that you looked at that, if there is jurisdiction for a year-round expectation for food truck display and impact, that would have been part of the consideration initially as well. So I appreciate how we're stepping through this. I think that it's clear that we want to hear more about what's around temporary uses, so we don't miss an opportunity to really ensure that there is a best way forward, not just for the cities, but for those that have an entrepreneurial spirit that would impact ultimately best use and best impact for our city.
Very good.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor.
And Councilmember Worthington.
Thank you, Mayor Figueroa. And actually, Councilmember Boykin, I think, covered things very nicely from my perspective as well. And so I want to echo those same comments. First things first, we're going to work with this and then build on it as our experiences allow us to. Thank you.
I do have some comments, but before I say them, again, very thoughtful comments. I like them a lot and brought a lot of ideas to me what to be asking for. I like being last. But it looks like we're going to be doing well on time, so I'd like to put you on the spot, since now that after my comments, now that you heard all of us, can you provide some perspective where you may go, or what else do you need from us so you can come back in the second study session better prepared? So that's what I'm looking for you after looking from you after my comments. Okay. Okay. So with that, I think that, for example, Councilmember Fleming talked about being fair, and I think that's really important that we look that we're, being fair across the board. And that is, there's a fruit stand on Bridgeport, not too far after between 35th and 27th. I think it's way past 45 days, and it's a stand. Might as well be like a food truck on dirt, and nothing aesthetic like a brick and mortar. So, can you answer why we would allow that and not a food truck, as long as much time as they have?
They do get their temporary use permit every year for the 45 days.
They're only there for 45? Yeah. Oh, it seems like they're there like 2+ months. Huh, okay. Well, if you say they're 45, okay.
Yeah.
It just seems to me it was longer, so I'll take your word. I trust you.
They
argument.
get their permit for 45 days. If they may be a little longer every once in a while, but we do regulate it and go check on it.
Okay. The other one would be, I think that the parking area surface was an important one because we do have I went to a Chambers Bay, Pierce County Parks, responsible for the events down in Chambers Bay. Last summer, or this summer, last year summer, I went to a huge big band, 2 bands playing, and there was 2 food trucks on the grass. So how is that different from anybody else that we're about to say hard surface?
Yeah, that was done through a special events permit for that. So it was looked at holistically with the whole program, the bands and everything, including accessibility and so forth. So that was looked at through a larger permit review process. The temporary uses that are generally in this section are all on not publicly owned lands, generally on privately owned lands where they set up the stands temporarily for the 45 days.
Oh, okay, that answers a lot. Okay, thank you so much for. Now, that being said, moving forward, I see this obviously going to another study session, and I think that there is some exploration to be had from staff to bring back now that you heard from us. If you can provide any quick where you can see where this is going, so maybe we can provide a little bit more feedback to just hone it in for next time we can really maybe finish the business. If not, maybe the third. So, the floor is yours if you have any comments.
My staff for a quick reaction would be on the definition side, maybe some clarity on the drivable surface. It seemed that there was comfort in adding a definition for a mobile food unit, food truck. The one direction would be it seemed there was some indication that maybe there would want to be some study or further study on the number of days that would be allowed or consideration of that. For a recommendation on that, I would ask that it could be studied back at the Planning Commission through their work plan to dive into that deeper.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Worthington.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Figueroa. I just wanted to interject because that's not my intention. To be clear, I'm all for moving forward with this and then sending work plan back to the Planning Commission, but I don't need to wait for this, in my view. I think we have a definition that gives us a starting point. I think 45 days, keep in mind, these are not consecutive days. These are 45 days of use. Actually seems to cover, in a lot of cases, the use. And we can modify it. I'm saying let's get this piece done and move on. Now, if council overall would rather send this back to Planning Commission, I just want to make that point that that summary did not capture what I felt were my points.
And just quickly, too, because our job is to provide some direction for them to come back. So for me, I support that, and hopefully we can move on. And so I'll just go around the support that you may have for that.
So, yes, Mayor, I support the idea of moving forward with just a definition as is, again, with the looking at the definition of what a hard surface could be. I would like to revisit later as a separate event the 45-day special use permit thing, but not as part of this. We can go ahead and move with this.
And down the line, Councilman.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, so I just want to be clear what direction we're moving into. Because there's some things in this definition I would like to tweak or have a discussion, for sure. But the bulk of it, I concur with Councilmember Worthington that it's pretty much good. It's satisfactory, but it's not excellent. Just want to polish in the rough edges in it before I would feel comfortable approving a definition going forward. That's kind of my take on it. I'm not really comfortable with it. But you giving it my head nod on it right now. Thank you.
Mayor Figueroa, I absolutely concur with us moving forward. Again, for me, first things first, the definition is more than adequate to encourage and foster goodwill and entrepreneurial spirit forward. If there is a challenge beyond that, because the gate is too wide open, I'd rather find that out within the 45-day provision that's already providing boundaries and not dissuade anyone from being able to move in this direction if they already had intention and opportunity.
Councilmember Fleming?
Thank you. Kevin, I want to just first applaud you and your team for taking a stab at this, but I too echo the sentiments that I would not be wild and crazy about sending this back to the Planning Commission, because I honestly believe we'll get the same results back if we did that. Having said that, I would propose to you to maybe apply what I call the Eklund model, and what I mean by that is where Jack had a presentation to the council, he got some good feedback, and then came back to the council with a few recommendations on tweaks with some options. And I think, from what you've heard tonight, you have some pretty clear direction that the council's not wild and crazy about the 45 days, so maybe look at a couple of options and bring those to the next study session. And then the same for, defining what a hard surface is or what exceptions to a hard surface would be and what those might look like with a couple proposals. And I think the council can get to where it needs to get to really solidify this proposal and move it forward. So those are my recommendations, and they've worked in the past for us quite well. I'd say it probably would work well with this proposal that's before us.
Thank you. Councilmember Grassi?
Yeah, I have no further comments, but I do echo Councilmember Fleming's sentiments and would like to move forward. I agree. I don't think that this needs to go back to Planning Commission, but I do want to thank staff for their hard work on this, and I think that this is a great starting point, and I think that we'll get there. But I do think of just a few more clarifications, and I think we have a great starting point.
Okay, and staff, I think you got that point. We'll move on to your next proposal.
We have one more comment.
Yeah, just my last one, I promise.
You have
Pinky
2
promise.
seconds. No. Yes.
Okay.
Councilmember McCluskey.
All right, thank you. The other angst that I have is the look of the food truck. Is there any type of control we have over what that looks like? I really don't want it looking really trashy. So is there any consideration in regards to establishing, certain quality standards for a food truck? I know they can be quite eclectic, but, there's others I've seen that are quite, they're not kept up and they appear dirty and, just some of those thoughts for, the standards when we do the permitting for the food trucks. So I don't know if you ever thought about that or it's incorporated into how you do the permitting. Just a question I'm throwing out there right now.
Mm-hmm. It's not incorporated into the amendments right now, but what the Planning Commission did, discuss that a little bit, and I think that was a bit of the rub, is not having any sort of standards or design standards, and the different views on that ultimately ended up not moving forward with a recommendation to the Planning Commission and just leaving it at the 45 days, not a year around. And their recommendation did include that they recommend if the City Council wanted to move forward with something longer, that they should look at design standards or some sort of standards that would, or at least a survey and kind of more research into the current, the restaurants, the design standards that we have for those versus zero standards that might be applied to a food truck. So that was discussed, and the Planning Commission did recommend that the City Council consider that as an option.
Okay, I would like design standards, in my opinion, but thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome, and thank you. That was an excellent point, and I think that most of us probably agree some kind of a design or upkeep standards. Okay, moving on to your next one.
Next slide, please. Item number 3 is our density and dimension table, and this is basically a cleanup relating to the form-based code. When we did the form-based code and we renamed our zones and went to all mixed-use terminology, mixed-use neighborhood, mixed-use urban industrial, and mixed-use center, The table was adopted, you can see here there was several areas that were left blank on the table relating to setbacks for those zones. So the proposed recommendation from the Planning Commission and from staff is to add the numbers into these blank portions of the landscape, or I'm sorry, the density and dimension table. There is an overarching setback in the design standards. There's a blanket statement in there that says when you're adjacent to any R1 or R2 zone properties, you're required to have a building setback of 30 feet. So that was still a code provision that we had. However, we'd like to add those numbers into the density and dimension table. This came up during a review of a recent project that I was working on, where the applicant looked at the table and the number wasn't in the table because it was blank, and I referred them to the other code section, but it'd be much cleaner and clearer to add those numbers to this table. Next slide, please. And here is just the numbers added to the table for reference. And open that up for any questions.
Okay. Councilmember Fleming.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. Kevin, I know from past experience that our staff is uber smart and does nothing by accident. So the fact that we have a table that I know y'all worked on for several years with some blanks in it, there has to have been a rationale behind doing that in the first place. So what was the original thought of leaving those blanks in there, and why do we suddenly need to change that?
Unfortunately, I do not believe there was any rationale to leave them blank. I think it could have been several reasons without doing kind of a forensic analysis of how it got adopted, but it could have been a Scribner's error from the code codifier. If I went back and looked at to see what was actually adopted, it could have been we were dealing with multiple red line versions of this code with a lot of moving parts, and one of the versions might have been left blank.
Okay. But we don't have any record now to reference that and say this is what it was really meant to be and this is what we have now in the books. Is that right?
That is correct. I would say this, the previous density and dimension table that had the old zoning designations on it, there was no blank on that table.
Okay, so these numbers we're putting in here tonight, those numbers were actually the original numbers, you're just completing the chart.
Correct.
Is that fair?
Yes, that's fair.
Okay, so this is one of those no-brainer kind of things. It's a cleanup, as you stated. So, okay, thanks.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to move on to the next one.
Next slide, please.
Thank you. I'll take the next one again. This one, I have two slides for this one. This is pet daycare. It's sort of another instance where prior to adoption of the form-based code, there was one sort of matrix of uses, which you see here on the slide. When the form-based code got adopted, the commercial uses were moved over into that under the regional growth center. And so now we have actually two, and so those are the two tables you see here. A small snippet of our uses for our table for our regular zones, the R1 and multifamily and up, and then the form-based code, the regional growth center one. Prior to that form-based code, we did have a pet daycare use in the use table. It is currently still in our uses for other zones outside of the regional growth center, but it's omitted in the regional growth center form-based code table. So without that in there, it does beg that it is a prohibited use, which do not believe it was the intent. There are existing pet daycare uses, commercial uses along Bridgeport, along 27th, that have been in place for a number of years, and they would, be otherwise non-conforming or prohibited under our current code. So the cleanup here is to simply add in, on the next slide please, is to simply add in a pet daycare category and make it permitted in the regional growth center as it previously was in the commercial uses before adoption of the regional growth center mixed-use zones.
Thank you. Any questions? I don't see any. We'll move on.
And I'll, next slide. Yep, next slide, please. Yeah, I'll take this one as well. This is slightly similar. I'll try and run through this one as quickly, although this is, we've listed them. They might tend to get a bit more complicated as we run down the number here, but suffice to say, retail use, there's a couple different categories, levels of our retail, level 1 and level 2. Level 1, just for some background, is a project with up to 50,000 square feet of retail space, and level 2 is anything over 50,000 square feet of retail space. So in our use table, we've got all of the uses in the mixed-use zones, neighborhood, mixed-use urban industrial, and mixed-use center, and those are all color-coded with the orange, red, brownish, and purple. So for retail, currently in the code, level 1 is permitted in our mixed-use neighborhood zone. Level 2 would be prohibited by the fact that it's omitted in the chart. And then in the mixed-use urban 75, the red zone, that one is currently listed as a conditional use for just level 1. And by the level 2 being omitted, then it would be a prohibited use in that zone. Next slide, please. We could just quickly go to, this is just a quick slide to show the council and some of the new council members what that color coding looks like, and we just simply wanted to show those areas. The only proposed amendments we have for you are regarding the mixed-use neighborhood in the orange category and the mixed-use urban in the red category. Just to give you a quick little snapshot of where those locations are along Bridgeport, the town center area, a little bit down towards 40th, and then on 27th and Bridgeport is some mixed-use urban there, and everything outside of that in the orange is our mixed-use neighborhood. We can go to the next slide, and our proposed amendment for you this evening on the next slide is simply to make that change so that under the mixed-use neighborhood category for our neighborhood mixed-use zones, we're keeping the permitted level 1 the same, but adding in a conditional use option for a level 2, which would be over that 50,000 square feet. Again, mentioning that it's currently prohibited, anything that's over 50,000 square feet of retail. And it also is just important to note that our mixed-use neighborhood zones typically do have smaller lot sizes, and there might not be much option there to actually have a retail space over 50,000 square feet without combining some lots. But the conditional use option there for some of the uses is that goes before a public hearing, and that's the process for it. The P is something that's permitted outright, so they could just come in for a building permit with design review standards in place. But the conditional use category goes before the city's hearing examiner during an open public hearing for that process. The second proposed amendment is, more importantly, is under the mixed-use urban 75 zone, and this one is to strike out the level 1 under 50,000 square feet and less conditional option and make that a permitted use. Technically speaking, any retail use of any size from 0 square feet to 50,000 square feet would require a conditional use permit, and that's not something that I think was intended, because that's any small retail shop or any of the retail shops that we see in the area. So the proposed is to make both levels permitted use in the mixed-use urban 75 zone leaving the other zones exactly the same. No changes there under the mixed use in the urban industrial and mixed use center. I might have.
And this would also just, same thing, it corrects what was previously allowed before we adopted the form-based code. In the mixed-use urban zones, which is our kind of the core of the city primarily, we did not require a conditional use permit for retail uses up to 50,000 square feet, which would require that public hearing and be much more prohibitive.
I had one more slide. There was more of an example on the next slide of what that kind of looks. And this is just simply to show that the example of the old Albertson site is in the mixed-use urban 75 zone. If that site were to redevelop as, as a retail place over 50,000 square feet, it would be prohibited under our current because of the size. So it is limiting in one of our more intense zones, which again doesn't seem like that was the intent. But that's the last slide for this section.
Okay, that was a very good example, actually, and thank you. I'll take, any hands here. Councilmember Wood? Mayor Pro Tem Wood?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick technical question. If you have, say, an apartment with retail space on the first level, and the total retail space exceeds 50,000, but it's subdivided into different stores, how do you treat that? Is it a level 1 or a level 2?
It's the whole total.
The whole total?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right. Thank you, Mayor.
Yep, put me in your list if we please.
Okay, Councilmember Worthington?
Okay, great, thank you. So we have a number of cleanups obviously going on tonight, and that's, my recollection is when we worked on the form-based code, it's been, I think we started it pre-pandemic. The intent was to come back and look at it and revisit it and see where we have gaps, what worked, what didn't work, and in some cases where we have changes that we need to get cleaned up, and that's really what tonight seems to be mainly about. So, what I'm hearing from the descriptions is this particular change doesn't really, it reflects what's on the ground. It doesn't change uses that are in place or conflict with current uses. If anything, it conforms to current use. So do I have that kind of right?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
You're good? Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyone else? No hands? Okay. We have 5 minutes left, and because this is the first study, and I know we're going to have a second study for sure, we can either dive in and extend our meeting, and I've reviewed this material. The next two are going to be a lot more questions, a lot more maybe debate, discussion, I should say. And I'd like to have a clean cut here so that we give them feedback on 5 of them, and now we kind of see where we're heading to is come back on the second study session, pick up on 5 and 6 clean, and then let's go back with what they've cleaned up for us for a better view of where we're heading for consideration. And I'd like to get some feedback, either that or somebody makes a motion to extend the meeting. So I'll start over here.
Yeah, thank you. From my perspective, I would rather we get this done. This is our 3rd attempt to dive into this. Tonight we're getting there, and if 15 more minutes worth of work will get us there, I'm for that. I would move to extend the meeting to 9:15.
Okay. So one thing, I think I asked the staff, I think you went out the door, but didn't you say that this was our first study?
Yes.
We've had this on the agenda repeatedly, and we've been deferring it and deferring it.
So with that, we probably need at least a half an hour to finish the 2 items, and I would respectfully extend it to that if we did. Comment? Extend or end?
Thank you, Mayor. My only concern is what's the weather like right now? How's the travel? Is it going downhill? I can't see if it's snowing like it's supposed to be or not. If it's not, I'd say we can go ahead and continue till get this done.
Okay. McCluskey?
Well, I wouldn't mind breaking and coming back to this. I know this is going to be very detailed, and as long as it's at our next council meeting, I don't have any problem extending it. I don't think there's a urgency time lock on this. No? So,
At least several of the items, we've got some potential proposals out there that this would help or affect.
We would still end up with a second study session.
yeah.
I don't think even if we entertain the other two, we're going to provide enough to say this, bring a consideration next time. Boykin? Okay.
I'm just always in favor of getting the work done, Mr. Mayor, but if there is a second study session and it's inevitable, I'd just like to make sure that we had prudent opportunity to go through it and our idea has been expressed. If I could also ask one other question, and this is just clarifying for me, Councilmember Worthington said that essentially what we have right now, this information would align with what we've got on the ground. I just want to clarify specifically when it comes to the mixed use urban 75, where the suggestion is to go from conditional to permit outright. Would that not be contrary to what you just offered up, or am I misunderstanding something?
Before you answer that, we need to extend the meeting. Go ahead.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Mayor, I move to extend the meeting by 15 minutes to 9:15.
We have a motion on the floor already. I think that's out of order.
Oh, you did make a
Oh,
motion.
you made a
Okay.
motion.
I didn't-
My apologies.
I didn't
Yeah,
get it.
I'll withdraw my motion, which I withdraw my motion.
Okay. Okay, so you're saying.
All right. Again, I move to extend the meeting 15 minutes till 9:15.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so extend it. So go ahead and answer Councilmember Boykins.
And I just wanted to make sure that I'm clear. It would seem to me if we were moving from conditional to permanent outright use for the mixed-use urban 75 zone, then that would not be what we've got on the ground right now. Am I misunderstanding something?
It is what we have on the ground, in other words, what's built on the ground, but this is relating to new proposals that would be coming in and changing that for a new proposal that would come in to allow it outright and not have to go through a conditional use permit process.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to comment before we expired on the time was, I thought the purpose of this evening was to hear what the staff was proposing. I didn't hear that this was an emergency ordinance that we needed to take action on right away, but I heard some great ideas both from the staff and council. I wanted some time to process that and then come back to the second study session. So, to extend meetings beyond our deadlines, because you met your goal tonight, and throughout the whole meeting you were a perfect timekeeper for us and had us on task, and then we suddenly jump off the train going, well, let's just extend it and work on it. Didn't really make a lot of sense to me. I think we've got a really good working document here. We've raised some great questions. We've given the staff some taskings to go process, come back with some recommendations, and I would be in favor at this point of wrapping up the evening, let the staff do their thing, bring it back to the second study session, and then if it's the way we want it, adopt it, pass it, and move on from there. So that's my 10 cents for the evening.
Council, let me go, because Councilmember
Sure,
Grassi next, and then Councilmember Worthington, but just note, Councilmember Fleming, we still have two proposals that they need to go through that we haven't reviewed. Okay, Councilmember Grassi?
Thank you, Mayor. I was just concurring with Councilmember Fleming. I thought that we would be going to a second study session regardless, but I do want to echo that I do think the next two do require more than a 15-minute extension with the detail from what I remember in my one-on-one brief, and I would hate for us to rush through those to be without an action step for us to take tonight, especially with staff that is still out in these weather elements. I know that they were, encouraging to be safe. So I just want to make that clear. I would be in favor too to extend this conversation as it will be going to a second study session. So thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Worthington.
Thank you. And so, just to begin with, I think we've had enough tonight. And so, certainly we can end, as it seems to be the primary, the majority will of the council, and that's just fine. I had hoped we could get into the next two items. As Kevin briefly referenced, I believe there are permits that are waiting for our approvals. I am not suggesting we take action tonight or at the next meeting, just to be able to move the issue along. This has been on our agenda since November and has been extended repeated times since that time, and we have a permit application, or many, as far as I know, that is somewhat tied up in this, or maybe I've got that wrong. So, but I think the next one or two has something to do with how staff needs to interpret some height issues related to a specific permit.
With that, we did get a first and second, and everybody agreed to extend it to 9:15. So let's finish that and see what we can do to then, and then we'll go to the next study session to complete this task.
Like me take to the next item?
Yes.
Thank you. Floor area ratio standards. These are relating. This is relating to construction of single-family homes or just construction on R1 and R2 residential lots. Floor area ratio is basically the square footage of a house or structures that you can put on a lot that does not meet the minimum lot size. And the minimum lot size is in R1 is 9,000 square feet. This standard was first adopted in 2009 and was, vetted during that time through the Planning Commission and the City Council at that time. The floor area ratio is 42%. In other words, if you have a lot less than 9,000 square feet, you take that square footage, times it by 42, and that's the size of a home you can build on that lot. And the reason back then was the quick reasoning is to just reduce the overall mass of the building on the lot. Next slide, please. Currently, this floor area ratio, the way the code is currently written, it only applies to new construction. So a new home on a vacant lot. It does not apply to an addition to an existing lot, which the Planning Commission's recommendation was that this gave a disproportional advantage to an existing home, as if you had an existing home that didn't meet or was non-conforming, they could add on as much square footage as they could within the allowed setbacks. The proposal from staff is to essentially apply the floor area ratio equally to both additions and to a new construction. And I'll open that up for questions, knowing that there's 3 minutes left.
I'm entertaining hands. It looks like nobody wants to hurry up and discuss this in the next 2 minutes. Otherwise, we need to extend, and I don't think anybody, my take is, wants to stay any longer. So here's the direction that I kind of see for you guys. Is you got direction on the first 5. Thank you for starting on 6. When we come back, if you could start with 6, maybe go through that one more time, because I think this is a deep one, and I know 6 and 7 will be deep. And so we can do that, and then go back into the ones we've talked about and see if we can complete that. The agendas for February look light, and so we can fill that in with these 2 study sessions to try to get that done. And at least in the next 2 council meetings, because that way we're just not. I agree with Councilmember McCluskey, is that it's fine to take it to the next study session, but it's not fine when we pick it up 4 months down the line. It's hard to pick it up. So I will, unless there's urgent, important emergencies that come up that we have to we have to entertain other things. These 2 will be next in line for the next 2. Okay, and with that, we're done with this study session. Thank you.